Today we're going to be continuing to look through the week before Jesus rose from the dead. Today we're looking at that Thursday that's also known as Maundy Thursday. I'm going to be reading two accounts of when Jesus prayed in the garden at Gethsemane. The first one is found in Mark chapter 14. I'll be reading from the NIV version, and I'll be beginning in verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Now I'm going to read from Luke chapter 22, also in the NIV version. It's the same account, it's the same event, but a different account of it. So in Luke chapter 22, beginning in verse 39. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down, and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." I know that Jesus' prayer time with his Father is different and special because of his relationship to his Father, and I understand that Jesus' prayer life is different from my own. But I also know that how I think about prayer and how I go about the act of praying has been formed and modeled and guided by how Jesus prayed himself. Not just in the acts of his teaching, like the Lord's Prayer, or through looking at specific actions he took, such as when he would seek seclusion and he would seek quiet regularly in his prayer times. Or even just in remembering that Jesus would have prayed the Psalms much like we did this morning. It is also this account here that we read this morning. It is the fact that this prayer in the garden may actually be the biggest influence I have had on my understanding of prayer and the hope for how I can pray when I choose to seek God. There are several ways that this garden prayer has taught me and influenced how I think about prayer, and I'm guessing that there will be many more ways as I continue to learn and grow and develop in my prayer life. Here are a few of the things that I would like to share with you this morning. In some ways, there can be loneliness that happens in prayer. And don't get me wrong, prayer can have this amazing ability to draw Christians together, to build a bond between them. I am thinking of prayer. There's a prayer group that I was a part of in high school. And that one shaped so much of who I am today. I can vividly recall each of the faces and the people that were a part of that group over the course of 2 years. The conversations about prayer that took place where my grandmother was another key component of why I felt so close to her. She helped form the importance I understand prayer to have, and her joy in prayer helped me to find a way to enjoy prayer in a whole other way. And here in this church as well, we used to have a prayer group that met for a little over a year, and I believe only a few people ever came. I'm thinking specifically of Dave and Betty who would come. And those are two people people that still today I feel close to because of those shared times we had in prayer. Even though it's been almost a decade since we met in prayer, I still feel that connection to them. But for the most part, most of the times, I find that prayer can leave me feeling separated from others, especially when I am in a place of intense prayer and those around me don't have the same sense of urgency about it. And I wonder if this is similar to what Jesus experienced this evening as he was praying in the garden. This loneliness that can happen during times of intense prayer. Prayer that caused him grief and sorrow to the point of pain, of blood, sweat, and tears, literally. And the disciples were just able to sleep through all of it. And in some ways, maybe this loneliness, this separation from the disciples, only serves to highlight the intimacy that Jesus shared with his Father during this prayer. Maybe also by their absence, Jesus did not have an audience to share his prayer with. There was no distraction, and it allowed Jesus this chance to be so forced, or so vulnerable and so focused in his prayer time. At least that's something that I find at times happens for me. The most intimate conversations I have, the most vulnerable prayers that I have, take place in private. This garden prayer was an intense prayer. And it's a picture that can be quite powerful. I want to share with you, like last week, I want to share with you again just a snippet from the Book of God, the Bible as a novel. And I would like you to take this time to imagine what this prayer may have looked like for Jesus. Stay here. Jesus' words were short and bitten. To 8 of the disciples, he said, "Stay here while I pray." Touching Simon and James on their shoulders, then taking John's hand in his own, Jesus entered a private olive grove called Gethsemane. There was no light beneath these ancient trees, whose trunks were great twists of shadow. Jesus moved by memory. As he walked, breathing became difficult for him, and his legs felt numb and heavy. "My soul," he groaned, "my soul is sorrowful, even unto death." He stopped, and his throat was thickening. There was no controlling this anymore. "Wait here," he said, releasing John's hand. His voice sounded harsh, and he knew it would get worse. He barked, "Watch with me." And he rushed through the grove the distance of a stone's throw, then stumbled and fell face down on the ground. He drew his knees up under himself like a man palsied. He drove his fingers through the soil and howled, "Abba, Abba." Then the storm broke. Jesus wailed aloud from the earth even unto heaven, "Abba, Father, take this cup away from me. Take this cup away from me. Remove it, God. I don't want to drink such suffering. I don't." Silence. Jesus breathed through his nostrils, his cheek in the dirt. No wind, no light, no sound. Not the rustling of leaves, nor the call of an evening insect. Nothing. Without lifting his head by a terrible effort, Jesus uttered words more reasonable. "Father, all things are possible with you. You can abolish the cup. You can make this hour pass away from me." Sweat pooled in the bridge of his nose. It drizzled into his eyes, burning and dropped to the earth as thick as blood. Jesus was suffering powerful oppositions. He wanted his prayer to be both truthful and obedient. But these seemed to be adversaries within him, each demanding his soul. Jesus retracted his lips and ground his teeth, and for a long while could utter nothing at all. But then he brought his mind and his breathing and his horror under greater control, and he spoke the last part of his prayer in meek syllables. "Nevertheless, not my will, Father," Jesus said, "let yours be done." He lay a while in perfect quietness, then weak, empty, and exhausted, finally he rose up. I'm not a super emotional person, but I find this prayer affects me. This is a gut-wrenching picture to immerse myself in, to think of Jesus crying out to God in this way. And although I'm impacted by the pain Jesus endured even before he was arrested, I also find comfort and joy in this honesty that Jesus shares during this very intimate conversation. Because Jesus said, "I do not want to." Jesus said, I don't want to. And that is an incredible relief to me, because that is often how I feel when I am in an honest and intimate conversation with him. I regularly find myself in a place of saying, I don't want to do that. And how freeing it is to know that it's not only okay for me to feel this way, but it's even okay for me to say it, even out loud, even directed to God. It is okay to say, I don't want to do this. I don't like this calling. I don't like this task. I don't like the circumstances that I'm in, and I do not like what is happening around me. And to be clear, there is a distinction here. Jesus is not saying, oh, I strayed from the path and I don't like the consequences of my actions. That's something different. Nor am I suggesting that Jesus is being punished and that God somehow wants him to suffer. Jesus came to a broken and pain-filled world to save it. And in the process, he endures the ugliness that happens here. He even needed to endure it for God's work to come out as a way to save it. We can find ourselves in that place from time to time as well. We can find ourselves in a situation beyond our control, but still mired in pain and brokenness, not as a punishment, but because we simply live in a broken world that has been marked with sin and suffering. And God, although he does not want us to suffer, can use that suffering to do something amazing for his kingdom. But, and this is the crux of why it is okay for Jesus to say, I don't want to. Here is what Jesus says at the end. Not my will, but yours. The willingness to put God's will over his own. And that is the power and the completeness that happens in Jesus' prayer. He is intimate and honest in his praying, and he is humble. He recognizes who he is, who God is, and what needs to be done. When we find ourselves in the same place, or saying, but God, I don't want to, the power and the completion of that prayer happens in the but. I will put aside my wants so that your work can take place. This is not an easy prayer to pray, and I'm going to be honest. I've had times where I cannot bring myself to pray it. There have been a few times when the kids have been going through something difficult. There was a few times when my niece was dying, and there have been times, lots of times, where I have felt pain and sorrow over some sort of impending loss. And my prayer ends up being, God, I know I am supposed to say, but your will, and I can't bring myself to do it. I can't always commit to that last part of the prayer because I know they are not empty words. God takes whatever we give him, and he will use it in amazing ways. If we allow God and we give him whatever we have, he will use it. And this is including even when we give him our pain or our sorrow or our loss. It seems a little confusing to try to explain it sometimes. But I trust that God can do all things, and I trust that God is a good God. I know he wants good things for me. And I trust that in the end, he has a place for me. A place that knows no pain and the joy will never end. My cup will be overflowing. But I also know that this is not the same thing as I will never have pain or I will never have problems in this life. That has never been promised to me. There are times where God has a good plan to transform that pain and that brokenness that exists in our world, but that transformation process is not always easy. And so I find it good to say that I don't want them. But I want to always be able to say, God, but your will be done. I'm not perfect at it, because I know he is faithful to follow through if I give him that allowance. That's okay. I'm not Jesus, but I want to be. I want to be more like him. Because this is not just a sad, sad part of the story. There is an aspect to this prayer that has a great deal of hope and comfort to it as well. Because when Jesus prays in the garden, Jesus is turning to God not just to complain. Jesus is not just drawing attention to this selfless faith that he has. Jesus ultimately is turning to God to seek comfort during his time of crisis. Jesus is asking God to not have to be alone, to be able to endure what is being asked of him. Jesus is asking and seeking that God, his loving Father, will help him finish what has been started. And aren't we so glad that Jesus did finish it? Even though it was terrible for him then, we should never forget that it was terrible. What blessings and what miracles, what life do we have because God helped him through it? Yes, Jesus was willing to allow God's will to be the way, but God helped him to endure. Our seeking God in a time of struggle is not just an act of asking for him to make it better. It's not just a time of letting out our frustrations and venting, but our prayer is also seeking comfort and help in the midst of those struggles. And he will help us through it. And that way we find a God who is good and loves us, and will listen when we tell him we don't like it, and will stay with us through it all, and will work wonders and miracles when we allow him to have his way. Please join me in closing prayer. God, we are grateful that you are a God who listens to us. That when we come to you and we pour out our frustrations and our hurt and our heartache, you listen to it. It's okay for us to tell you that we don't like something. It is okay for us to say, I don't want this. But you will help us through. If we are willing to let your will be done, if we are willing to give over to what it is you would have done, God, you will stay with us through it. You will help us to endure, and you will do something wonderful and amazing with that. That is our prayer for this morning, and I pray that that is each of our prayer as we go through this week. So much of us have lots that we are enduring this week, God. There are so many things going on, it's not even worth listing them, in all honesty, God. There are so many things to endure this week, and we know if we come to you, you will listen as we cry out in grief and say, we do not like it. We know that you will listen as we come to you with that. And we know that if we are willing and we are able to say, but your will, you will help us to get through it. We know if we say, but your will, God, your kingdom, what you would want to have happen, you will do something amazing and wonderful. We pray that that is what we can pray each and every day this week.